Hello, everyone. We have people jumping on. We're going to go ahead and get started with today's webinar. My name is Tamara Goldbogen. I'm the Beverley Taylor Sorenson Endowed Chair in Arts Learning and Director of the Arts Learning Collaborative at Weber State University.
And I'm Alisa Petersen, and I am the Beverley Taylor Sorenson Endowed Chair of Elementary Arts Education and Director of the Arts Fusion Program at Southern Utah University.
It is our pleasure to welcome you all to today's webinar, What a Great Salt Lake. Today's workshop is part of the Arts Integration webinar series, The Science Around Us, that is presented by Southern Utah University and Weber State University. Before we jump into the webinar, I'll cover a few housekeeping items. I'll introduce today's presenters and go over the schedule. If you need any tech support during the webinar, please call 801-626-6945 or email Samantha Steffen. The contact information will be in the chat. We're dropping that in right now. We suggest that you view today's webinar on a laptop or desktop computer for the best viewing experience. You can adjust window sizes by using the slider in the border located in between the shared presentation and the presenter boxes. At the conclusion of the webinar, we will provide you with a link to a survey. When we receive your completed survey, we will award you your relicensure hours in Midas. Also, by the end of next week, we will add you to a Google Drive folder that will contain today's presentation and a host of other valuable resources from today's webinar. We are recording today's webinar, and we'll add that to the Google Drive when it's ready to go. Don't forget, get your materials ready for today. The list is in the chat. We encourage you to work alongside our presenters today as they demonstrate different arts integration activities and approaches. Make sure you have your printed copies of the 3-2-1 Bridge Thinking Routine and the Great Salt Lake water level and salinity graphs. All right, we have some amazing presenters for our webinar today. We have Dr. Amy Miner from In Focus Education, Angelic Anderson from the Great Salt Lake State Park, Alisa Petersen from Southern Utah University, Aaron Roundy from Weber State University, Samantha Steffen from Weber State University, Kelly Bruce Glenn, Utah Valley University, and myself, Tamara Goldbogen, here at Weber State University. We have a packed schedule for you today. So just going over it briefly, Amy will be helping us connect all the different things that we're doing today to USB standards. Alisa is going to lead us through a 3-2-1 bridge thinking routine. We have a great interview with Angelique from the Great Salt Lake. I will show you how to do a knotted fleece brine shrimp puppet. Samantha will lead us in a musical soundscape connected to the Great Salt Lake. I'll introduce our new children's book, Floyd the Flamingo Flees the Flock. We will have visual art graphing with Aaron Roundy. We will come back and revisit the 3-2-1 bridge thinking routine and then do some salt painting with Alisa. Kelly will lead us through some movement and dance connected to the Great Salt Lake. And then we'll bring everything back together. Amy will tie everything back to the standards for everything that we learned in today's webinar. Then you'll have an opportunity. We'll have a Padlet, and you can share any art that you're creating at home with us. And then, of course, at the very end, we'll have a little bit of time for Q&A with any of the panelists. You'll be able to ask any questions. And then, of course, we'll have the survey that you'll complete. All right, we have some learning intentions for today. Whoops, sorry about that. We have some learning intentions and success criteria for today's webinar. Our learning intentions are to take part in an arts integrated activity to connect science and the arts, and two, to explore Utah standards and how they align. Our success criteria for today's webinar is to leave the webinar having at least one idea of how to integrate science and art into your classroom, and to recognize intersections and overlaps in the Utah standards. Now I'm going to invite Dr. Amy Miner to join me, and she's going to lead us in connections to USBE standards.
Hello, everyone. Nice to be with you. Thank you, Tamara, for the introduction. So as we get started today, we want to start with our science standards as the foundation for our conversation. And as you may or may not be aware, but part of the USPE SEED science standards include engineering practices. In our presentations today, I want you to be looking for opportunities to engage students in asking questions and defining problems, analyzing and interpreting data, using mathematical thinking, and constructing explanations and designing solutions in lots of varieties, including in text, graphs, diagrams, charts, tables, and verbally. In addition to those engineering practices, we also want you to be watching for patterns. Go ahead, Tamara, to the next screen. So with these patterns, we're watching for cross-cutting patterns that show up across all of the grades and across all of the different science concepts. Patterns and cause and effect. We're watching for systems when we're looking at the relationships between complex systems. And certainly the Great Salt Lake fits that category of a complex system. We want you to be watching for how energy and matter flow, how transformation, and conservation of energy and matter change through the different relationships and the different roles and organisms that habitat in the Great Salt Lake. Also, of course, looking at stability and change as an overarching theme when we look at how we interact with our environment. Which brings us directly to our SEED standards and the content. I just threw up a couple of different examples here from a couple of the different grades. So in grade 2, we could tie this back together to living things and their habitats. In grade 3, we'll be exploring things around climate patterns and specifically how they impact our environment. In grade 4, you could connect it back to organisms functioning in their environment, including some really unusual organisms that you probably won't see anywhere else except for in the Great Salt Lake. As we go into the grade that really makes the strong connections is in our 6th grade science standards. And this is specifically looking at weather patterns and climates, and specifically at the systems and patterns that impact Utah and specifically the Utah regions, including lake effect and temperature inversions. Notice on this next slide, strand 6.4, and in this one of the things that I love about this is that we're looking at stability and change in ecosystems. And I'm really excited for you to listen to Angelique and some of her comments as she talks about the way that the Great Salt Lake is changing as an ecosystem. And what are some of the variables that are impacting the environment? And what are some of the things that we can do as we interact with our environment? One of the other things that I really love on this is look at standard 6.4.3 at the bottom. It specifies specifically Utah ecosystems, such as the mountains and the Great Salt Lake, including the wetlands and the desert surrounding it. So super excited about the science connections that we'll be making. Now, often when we have an arts integrated focus, we rarely get a chance to bring in math. So I'm super excited on this next slide to give you an opportunity to be watching for how are we using mathematical thinking, including modeling with math, and who knew you could connect math and data to art? Well, leave it to Erin Roundy to bring that in for us. So that'll be super exciting. And actually, you'll see in several of the presentations how we're gathering and using data as a conversation starter in dance, visual arts, and in the various different content areas. So super excited about that part. Also, it wouldn't be a well-rounded presentation if we weren't bringing in English language arts, and I'm super excited about the children's book that will be introduced as part of this webinar. Whenever we use literature, children's books, nonfiction, we're engaging students in opportunities to express and listen to ideas, to evaluate information, and then to think about ways to apply what they know in various ways. In this particular story that we'll be sharing with you today, I hope you'll take a look at the character, the setting, the events of the stories, as well as the opportunities with the puppet that Tamara is going to be showing you. And specifically in the book, be looking at the different animals that are a part of the Great Salt Lake habitat and some of the vocabulary that we'll be learning about them. As we round out our presentation today, of course, we want to focus on the arts. These are some of the things we'll be watching for. I love in the visual arts the opportunity to design using various materials, salt, data, to really explore questions, interests, and to demonstrate our knowledge. It'll be wonderful to learn from Samantha as we look at a soundscape and specifically the kinds of sounds that we would find in the Great Salt Lake ecosystem. As you move on to dance and drama, of course, we'll be building a puppet and we'll be able to make those connections into how we tell stories and how we explore various aspects of our characters and through various movement activities. That's all great. You can leave it there. As you move through the various places and the various content areas represented in our webinar, we really hope you'll ask at the heart of all of this, what works best in your school? What works best in your classroom? And specifically, what would work best with your students? And as you think about that, find ways to personalize this and bring this through in an integrated learning opportunity. Thanks, Tamara. Back to you.
Thanks so much, Amy. All right, now it's my pleasure to bring back Alisa Petersen.
Hi. So at this point, I'd love you to get out the worksheet that's 3, 2, 1 bridge, and let's go ahead and go to the next slide. So in your packet, those of you who have supply packets, there are some images. And for those that didn't receive packets, you can scan the QR code that says Art Images, or click on the link that is going to pop up in the shared drive, or in the chat, excuse me, and that will take you to a Padlet where you can take a look at these images. We're going to talk about where they came from a little bit later in the webinar, but for now, I'd like you to choose one that you feel like resonates with you or may connect with the grade level or the students that you teach. So just choose one of them, and we're going to do a first impression activity. So on the next slide, you'll see that this is the worksheet that we're going to use, and we're going to start out by thinking, what 3 words come to mind when I look at this work of art? So on the next slide, you'll see that I chose one image in particular to work with, and my 3 words are, let's see, bird, flower, and sad. So once you have thought of 3 words, just first impression for the image that you chose, then we'll go on to the next thing, which is to think about 2 questions that come to mind. So imagining I'm a young student, I might have questions like these. What kind of flower is that? And is the bird crying? So what questions are coming to mind about the image that you are choosing to look at? You can write that down in your worksheet. And then on the next slide, you'll see that the third thing we'll do is just to write down one metaphor or simile. So you can say to students, what does this remind you of? What does it make you think of? And for me, when I saw this image, it reminded me of a national symbol or a state symbol. So it looks like the artist chose to draw that in a way that would make me think of my country or my state. So that was my metaphor. It looks like a symbol. So once we have these 3 things recorded, 3 words, 2 questions, and 1 metaphor, then we'll set that aside and learn about the Great Salt Lake. And we're going to revisit this later to see what changes in our thinking and understanding about the work of art that we're looking at. Okay, thanks.
Thanks so much, Alisa. All right, now we're going to our interview with Angelic, Great Salt Lake State Park.
Hello, I'm Erin Roundy, the Program Assistant with the Arts Learning Collaborative here at Weber State University, and I am here with Angelic Anderson from the Great Salt Lake State Park, and she is here to share with us more about this wonderful body of water. Let's start with having you introduce yourself and tell us what you do.
Yeah, my name's Angelique. I'm out at Great Salt Lake State Park. I'm the park ranger out there. I help with the visitor center, the campground, marina side of things, as well as the interpretive programs and getting people out and seeing the lake.
Great. What inspired you to become a park ranger?
Yeah, so I went to the University of Utah and graduated in the Environmental and Sustainability Studies major. I knew I wanted to be outdoors and I love recreating outdoors. And so as I was going to school, I got a seasonal position with Great Salt Lake State Park. And just coincidentally, as I graduated, a full-time position had opened up for a park ranger. And I've been there ever since, and I've loved the lake.
Oh, that is great. So can you tell us, what does a day in a life of a park ranger look like?
Yeah, so a majority of what I do is interacting with the public. We get a lot of people from all over the world that come to visit the lake and don't really know much about it. And so I'm there, I kind of help with questions. I do the interpretive programs to make sure, some of the local people as well as visitors can come out and learn about the lake. As well as, assisting with the visitor center, making sure everyone that's coming through is getting the great experience at Great Salt Lake State Park.
What do you wish more people knew about the Great Salt Lake?
Oh, yeah. So one of the things that typically surprises people is the size of Great Salt Lake. In average levels, Great Salt Lake is about 75 miles long and 35 miles wide. That comes out to be about 1,700 square miles. And we get a lot of people that come through visiting and try to make it to multiple stops on the lake within like an hour time span. And so we have to let them know there's not going to be a lot they can get within an hour. And so like Antelope Island from Great Salt Lake State Park is actually about an hour and 10 minutes to their visitor center. A lot of interest in Spiral Jetty, of course, which is up on that north arm of the lake. That's almost a 3-hour drive depending on gravel road conditions out there. So understanding the size of the lake is very important when visiting.
What is your favorite Great Salt Lake fact?
Oh, that one's a bit difficult. Just choosing one. It's like, but the fact that the north arm of the lake is pink is something you don't see in a lot of areas, pink water. And so being able to go up to that north arm of the lake and seeing it's such a vivid shade of pink, it is pink year round. And it can kind of vary depending on how much water we've been getting in. But being able to see that pink part of the lake, I definitely recommend if you ever have the time. But again, I usually recommend Spiral Jetty for that, so it can be quite the drive.
Why is the Great Salt Lake so important?
Oh yeah, so it's really important to understand the Great Salt Lake and not only the life around the Wasatch Front, how it's affecting us, but it's also internationally renowned. We've got it used to be a 7 wonder of the world. So we have people from all over the world that come to visit Great Salt Lake. And Great Salt Lake impacts a lot of things in our daily lives, especially around the Wasatch Front. We are in winter right now, still a bit iffy. I was like, but we have the Utah's greatest snow on earth, as Utah has termed it, because the lake effect from Great Salt Lake. Without the lake, we would not be getting that same type of snow and as much snow as we typically get. In fact, when those lower lake levels were happening, a lot of dust particles were also in the snow as well, which attracts the sun and melts it quicker. So a big thing is, the snow recreation we have out here, which is just huge for Utah. We also, Great Salt Lake supplies 14% of the world's magnesium. It is the only water-soluble source for sulfate of potash in North America. So an understanding that impact to the environment, the economic standpoint, of course. Great Salt Lake is a site of hemispherical importance for migratory birds. We get birds from South America that come up. So Great Salt Lake, it just affects every kind of life in the area.
That's really fascinating. There's some things you shared with me that I had no idea about, so thank you for that. Can you talk about the plants and animals living in and around the Great Salt Lake? You talked about the birds. Let's expand that a little bit more.
Yeah, definitely. So, of course, we've got the brine shrimp, one of the main organisms that lives its whole life in the lake, and you can actually see with your eye. Brine shrimp are such unique creatures. They can have either live births or they lay cysts, like a hardened shelled egg. And it all depends on the type of conditions. So during the summer, when conditions are nice and warm, they have those live births. However, when it gets cold, or say if the salinity was too high, so like the previous year where we were getting those historic low levels, the salinity was increasing. And so brine shrimp can only survive up to about 18% salinity. And where Great Salt Lake State Park is right now is probably about 15% with the recent water we've had in. So brine shrimp are very important. They are used actually as a toxicity level for a lot of different studies. So brine shrimp having the adaptation to survive in those high salinity and a lot of, a harsh environment are very important to the lake. We also have pickleweed, which we love the pickleweed. It is a little plant that doesn't have the typical leaves, but if you were to eat one of the little pieces, it actually tastes like salt. And that is because when pickleweed, because it's in such a harsh environment and we've got that salt just everywhere around the lake, it actually, when it gets the water, it will separate out the salt and it stores it in those leaf-like structures, whereas it actually absorbs the water like a regular plant at that point that it needs. So that is a very fascinating plant to see around the Great Salt Lake. And of course, we've got the brine flies, which can be an annoyance to some. It's like we just get such massive numbers around the lake, but that's really because the brine flies in their larva state use areas like the microbial mats or the reef structure that's in the lake as kind of its little metamorphosis stage, that those larvae will actually hang around that reef structure, and that's what they eat. And then they will eventually become the little brine flies, and they typically stay along the shoreline. And while they don't bite, the massive numbers of them are just, it's a sight to see. Because we've got such massive numbers of brine flies on the shoreline, it's really funny to watch the birds react to them. So the birds, specifically some of the gulls we get out, will actually be wading along the shoreline and they run with their mouth open and they just catch all these brine flies in them and they eat them. And so it's a very funny sight to see. In fact, we get a lot of visitors that come through and they're like, why are these birds running crazy? And it's because they're eating the brine flies.
Why should students and adults learn about the Great Salt Lake?
Yeah, so I think it kind of goes back a little bit to that importance question. I think if students and teachers learn about the Great Salt Lake, they understand why it's so important to the area as an international source as well. And so seeing that importance of, the environmental importance on the birds, the brine shrimp, a lot of different life around the lake, like the plants itself. Also seeing, of course, the extraction around the lake. We've got, 5 major salt companies. There are, of course, different recreating sites around the lake as well. Not only just the 2 state parks that are on the lake, but also a lot of wildlife refuges. And so I do believe that, educating about the lake and the importance can kind of also help bring people out and see the lake, because you should definitely come out and view the lake. I definitely would recommend floating in it to get that experience that you won't really see many other places.
What's one misconception about the Great Salt Lake?
Oh, yes. So probably one of the biggest misconceptions that I hear is that the lake is dirty. And I attribute that usually because they have got the term lake smell. And certain times, a lot of times it's when storms come through, the city will get it's kind of a pungent, like sulfur type smell. And that is actually the oolitic sand we have. It's not typically the water itself. In fact, if you go out on the water and a bit from the shore, you won't smell that at all. And so with that lake smell also comes the misconception that it's dirty because we've got those brine shrimp that filter out all the algae and pollutants of the lake. We're actually one of the cleanest lakes in the state. So the misconception of the smell and it being dirty really deters a lot of people from coming out. And so that's something I've really tried when we've got visitors to make sure they know, no, the lake is clean. It's really fun to go in. It's really the sand we have, the oolitic sand, makes it a bit difficult at times.
How can teachers and students be good stewards of the Great Salt Lake as citizens of Utah?
Of course. So some good steps in becoming stewards is, of course, coming out to the lake, seeing the importance and what a unique ecosystem it is. But of course, also being water-wise. You know, we have had a phenomenal last 2 winters. It's like, but we're still in a 25-year drought, I believe is the number. And we need to be conscious of our water use, making sure we actually get water to the Great Salt Lake. We also, trash is a big thing. It's a very big lake. It gets trash from all over, whether it's, directly either into the lake, whether it's from the rivers that come in. We've got some very large highways that border the lake. So also just being aware of trash or possibly helping pick up trash. Friends of Great Salt Lake does some great cleanups every year. And we are also interested in having other people come out and do cleanups.
Well, here we go. Is there anything we didn't ask you that you want people to know about?
There are 2 state parks that are on the Great Salt Lake. There's Great Salt Lake State Park down on the southern shore, as well as Antelope Island State Park, which isn't far from here. And coming out and seeing the lake is something that a lot of locals can't say they've done. And so I would definitely recommend, coming out, seeing the lake. You don't have to get it in if you don't want to. This time of year, it's still cool. But down in like the July, August time frames, the water gets up to 90 degrees, depending on air temperature. So it really is just a unique environment, and I would definitely recommend coming out and actually seeing it. And of course, there's a bunch of different like refuges along the way or spiral jetty that are also great stops along the lake. So there is a lot to do around the lake. So I definitely recommend coming out and recreating there.
Well, thank you, Angelique, for spending time with us today to share your knowledge and your expertise about our Great Salt Lake.
Yeah, thank you guys so much for having me.
What a great informational interview with Angelique. Thanks so much, Angelique.
Hello.
All right, moving right along. Angelique talked a little bit about the brine shrimp puppet, and now we'll share a video where I'm going to show you how to make a knotted fleece brine shrimp puppet. Hey, my name is Tamara Goldbogen, and I'm the Beverley Taylor Sorenson Endowed Chair in Arts Learning at Weber State University. I'm going to show you how to make a knotted fleece brine shrimp puppet today, just like this one. What you need to make the puppet is 1 piece of pink fleece that is 2 inches by about 16 inches long, 1 piece of pink tulle that is about 6 inches by 6 inches. I buy tulle on a spool that is already 6 inches wide, so it's easier to cut. 1 piece of fringe that is 6 inches, and 1 googly eye finger ring. If you're not familiar with these, they are great ways to introduce young puppeteers to creating puppets, as you can just slip it right on your hand and start creating puppets. You also need 2 pipe cleaners. To make the brine shrimp, take your piece of fleece and pick one end that you want to be the head of your puppet and make a knot. The great thing about knotted fleece puppets is if you make a knot and you don't like the way it looks, you can always undo it and redo it until you make a knot the way that you like it. So that's going to be the head of my puppet. Then on the other end of the fleece, you're going to make another knot. That's going to be the other end of the puppet. Now, brine shrimp kind of have a long tail looking thing, so you might want to have a long tail coming out of your other knot. And then I'm going to put a knot right in the middle of the body. All right, so this is going to be the body of our brine shrimp puppet. Should look something like this. All right, next, you're going to take that piece of tulle that you have and tie it in a knot right behind the head of the puppet. So I'll do that now. All right, so my tulle is tied right behind the head of my puppet. Might look something like that. Great. Next, we're going to take the googly eyes and we're going to pop that onto the body of our puppet, behind the head of the puppet and in front of the tulle. So in between those 2 pieces. So that's going to look something like that. Head knot, googly eye ring, and then tulle. So that's the top of our puppet. All right, now we're going to make the control rods so that we can manipulate our puppet. You're going to do that with pipe cleaners. You have 2 pipe cleaners. Take your first pipe cleaner and fold it to form the letter V, just like that. Now you're going to twist the bottom of the letter V until you form the letter Y. So I'm going to twist that. The letter Y. I'm going to repeat that process with my second pipe cleaner. The letter V. I'm going to twist the bottom to make the letter Y. The letter Y. All right. So take one of your pipe cleaners and you're going to place the body of your puppet right inside the Y. And you're going to want to make sure this is just behind the googly eyes and in front of the tulle. And now you're going to take those ends that are sticking up and you're going to fold them over. What I like to do on this end of the puppet is fold them over and cover the googly eye ring to hold it in place. So we'll end up with something that looks like this. You just want to squish them down till everything is tight. Now you're going to take your other control rod or pipe cleaner and you're going to put it on the other end of the body of your puppet. You want to make sure it's on the inside of your tail knot so it doesn't slip off the end. So place the body right in the Y and just fold over the ends of the pipe cleaner and secure them. Great. So now we're starting to get a brine shrimp puppet. Going to make a few adjustments. Great. Now we're starting to get a brine shrimp puppet. We have one more thing to do, and that is to add the fringe. So I picked some fringe that is going to represent the appendages or all the legs that are on the adult brine shrimp. And what I'm going to do is take this fringe and again just tie it in a knot right in the middle of the body of our puppet. So I'll tie a knot. Make a few adjustments. And now I have a brine shrimp puppet that is made out of knotted fleece. So there's a lot of fun ways for your students to activate a puppet while they're learning more about the brine shrimp that are in our Great Salt Lake. You can practice how a brine shrimp moves. Did you know that adult brine shrimp swim upside down by rhythmically beating their legs? So you might try that out with your puppet. You can also grow brine shrimp in your classroom. They're marketed as sea monkeys, and you can purchase those to grow your own. One of my favorite ways to use puppets in the classroom is to have students create a puppet show. First, they create characters for the puppets they make. I've included a character sheet in the resources for this webinar. The character sheet has a few simple questions to help your students use their imaginations to name and create a character for their puppets. Students work in small groups and create and perform a short show where one of the puppets faces their greatest fear. All the puppets work together to find a peaceful solution. I love to have students incorporate relevant vocabulary in their puppet shows. I usually ask them to incorporate about 3 vocabulary words into the show. And don't forget the book. The brine shrimp is a character in the book you all have received or now have access to, called Floyd the Flamingo Flees the Flock. There's some fun and interesting scientific facts about brine shrimp in the back of the book, so check it out. I hope you have fun using puppets as a teaching tool in your classroom. Thanks. Great. Well, I hope some of you were able to follow along and make some brine shrimps. We look forward to seeing those. You can share those with us at the end of the webinar. All right. Hey, my name. There we go. Okay. Next, we're going to learn about creating a musical soundscape with Samantha Steffen.
Hello everyone, I'm Samantha Steffen, BTS Arts Program Coordinator at Weber State University in the Arts Learning Collaborative. Today we are going to explore learning about the Great Salt Lake through music by using a soundscape. A soundscape is a combination of sounds that you can find in a particular place or that you put together to create a certain effect. For example, in a forest, you might hear a soundscape of wind rustling leaves in the trees, birds chirping, squirrels running along branches, and water rushing in a stream. Or a composer might use instruments or voices to create the feeling of being in a certain place by imitating the sounds found there. Soundscapes can immerse us more fully into another place by engaging our sense of hearing. To create a soundscape, students must use what they have learned to imagine being in a setting and think about what they would hear. Soundscapes are a great way to allow students to play instruments in the classroom. Pitched and non-pitched percussion instruments let students explore sounds and find ways to use an instrument to create musical ideas for a specific purpose. Students have to think about what kind of sound they would like to make, and then select an instrument and play it in a way that creates that sound. Students can also create sounds with found materials, body percussion, their voices, and even technology. Here I have an ocean drum. It's a double frame drum with beads inside. As I tilt the drum, the beads roll and create sounds like waves. If I didn't have an ocean drum, I could still use common materials to make a similar sound. For example, I have a bag of beads and 2 paper plates. I could pour some beads into one plate and use the other as a lid. Or I could even just move the beads around in a zip top bag. I could use these wave sounds as the base for my Great Salt Lake soundscape. I can use my hands to make the sound of wind blowing through tall grass, and make wind sounds with my mouth. I can use recordings of bird calls on YouTube, Cornell Lab of Ornithology's All About Birds guides, or other sources to include birds that live around the Great Salt Lake. When I lead a soundscape activity, I need to think everything through and give students clear directions and limitations. It might seem counterintuitive to add structure to a lesson where students get to be creative, but these parameters will give students a guide to be successful and not get overwhelmed by too many choices. Students need to know what they're allowed to use, how to correctly play any instruments available, what they need to accomplish with their soundscape, and the steps they need to take to get to their final product. As you design your soundscape activity, you can adapt the directions, purpose, and limitations to match the standards for your specific grade level and group of students. Let's imagine I have a second grade class who has been learning about living things and their habitats using the ecosystem around the Great Salt Lake. I could start by having the class brainstorm what kind of sounds they might hear in that setting. What sounds could I hear from plants, animals, and natural elements during the daytime? How about at night? After brainstorming, I would tell the class we're going to work in groups to create our own Great Salt Lake soundscapes. Each group is going to be assigned either day or night and need to fill out a composition sheet as they plan their soundscape. Each group member needs to contribute one sound, and they need to be able to play their soundscape for 15 to 30 seconds. I would then tell the class what they're allowed to use and review how to use those materials and instruments properly before dividing the students into groups. Here's an example of a composition sheet that uses iconic notation. I have lines on the side for students to indicate the sound source and open space for them to notate how to perform the sound in a way that makes sense to them, whether or not they've learned how to read and write music. I also have a place for students to write their reasons for choosing certain sounds. Each group fills out a composition sheet as a map for their soundscape. If my students have created other soundscapes successfully, or I want to repeat this activity with an added goal, this would be a great place to include a bar graph for my math instruction. I could tell my groups that their soundscapes need to follow the bar graph. Students might interpret higher bars as louder volume, more sounds layered in, or something else that might surprise you. Whether you use a composition sheet like this one, create your own format, or just give students blank pieces of paper, I suggest going over the sheet and giving directions before dividing your students into groups. When groups are finished, I would give them a practice run and a few minutes to refine their soundscape before performing for the class. Before their turn, each group can tell whether they created a day or night soundscape and give a short explanation of their choices. Students practice both performing in front of an audience and being a good audience member. Good audience members listen attentively, keep their focus on the performers, and applaud at the end. Creating a soundscape is an extremely flexible activity that you can adapt to almost any grade level, subject area, group size, and classroom space. I hope you have fun hearing what kinds of sounds you and your students can create to bring learning to life.
Samantha, thank you so much. I love that. So next, it is my pleasure to introduce you guys to the new children's book, Floyd the Flamingo Flees the Flock. Those of you who received materials for the webinar, you received a hard copy of this book. For those of you who did not receive materials, we're going to give you access. We're going to drop a PDF into the chat right now so that you can click on that and take a look at the book, Floyd the Flamingo Flees the Flock. We're also going to include it in the resources for this webinar. I thought I'd just give you a little background about this book. If you don't know the story, this book is inspired by the real life story of Pink Floyd, a Chilean flamingo that actually escaped from the Tracy aviary back in the late 80s. It lived out its life on Antelope Island, And when we heard that story, we thought it would be really fun to create a children's book inspired by that. So here you can see just a couple of the images. This book was written and illustrated by Weber State University students that were taking a course called Children's Literature, Book Arts and Science. And we did that in fall of 2023. Erin Roundy and myself were the instructors for that course. We had a lot of fun learning. We went out for a field trip, just like Angelique suggested. The whole class went out to Antelope Island and took a tour of the area and learned about everything that was out there. And then we made characters out of the different animals that are on Antelope Island. And in the back, you can see there's some cool scientific facts about each of the animals. So you can check that out. We worked with the Weber County Library and also Antelope Island State Park on this project. So we hope you enjoy that book. Now I'm going to invite Erin Roundy to jump on, and she is going to create art with graphs.
Hello, everybody. I'm glad to be here tonight. Before we get started, I just wanted to remind you that you are going to need your two line graphs, the water level and salinity, pencil and eraser, and colored pencils. Tamara, could you move a couple slides ahead? Next one. There we go. Oh, could you go back one more, just to the line graph one? There we go. All right, so for tonight's hands-on visual art activity, we will be using data that was taken from the USGS website. And I want to thank Alisa Petersen for taking all of that information and providing the line graphs for us. So thank you so much for that. Next slide. All right, so the first line graph that we are looking at is the water levels of the Great Salt Lake. And it's reflecting it from January 2020 to actually March 2024. So it's pretty relevant and current for us tonight in our activity to use. And as you can see, when you look at it, in January 2020, the water level was near 4,195 feet. But then it consistently dropped for 2 years, hitting around 4,189 feet in November of 2022. But then it started to rise last summer. As we know, we had a good year last year. And though it hasn't risen back to that high of January 2020, and it took a little dip last November, as of last month, we can see an upward trend due to our recent winter and snow accumulation. And though the water level difference isn't huge between the high of January 2020 and the low of fall 2022, it's around 6 feet, the impact is significant. And we will talk about the impact a little bit in a few slides. Next slide. All right, this line graph is showing the water salinity in two areas of the Great Salt Lake, Gilbert Bay and the Saltair Boat Harbor. And in this line graph, showing the salinity for the same date range from January 2020 to last month. And when we refer to salinity, we are talking about the amount of salt in a body of water. And in our case, we're talking about the Great Salt Lake. And what we're seeing here in this line graph is the numbers of grams of salt that are found in this range of time. And if we remember our previous line graph with the water level, you will notice that our lines are traveling in opposite directions in the graph. And so what we're going to do with this next slide is take a look and compare both line graphs to see the relationship between the data that they are showing. Okay. So as you can see, when the water level is high, so that is marked by the dark blue line that you can see here, like in January of 2020, the salinity of the water is low. But when the water level is low, even 6 feet difference, the salinity goes up because the balance is off. Now, ideally, you want the water level and the salinity to find that sweet spot. And why, you may ask, do we have to find that sweet spot? And so if we go to the next slide, we are going to kind of explore this. So here I have, first of all, let me point out that, did you know that the brine shrimp, which are little crustaceans that we've been introducing to you throughout this webinar, are the only living species that inhabit the Great Salt Lake. Yes, there are other things that are there, but this little guy, he is here for his whole life in this body of water of the Great Salt Lake. And so what I've done with this slide is I've taken our two previous line graphs, the one that has the water salinity and the water level, and I've actually laid them on top of each other. But you'll also see in this line graph that there is a yellow horizontal line going across, and there is a green horizontal line. I know they're a little bit light, but they are there. And those two lines are actually showing the survival range, the optimal survival range for brine shrimp. And so when the line graphs of both the water salinity and the water levels are sitting in between the optimal brine shrimp thresholds, things are in balance. But when those lines go outside of those thresholds, then we start to see greater impact. And as we noticed earlier, as the water level, when it goes down, we notice that the salinity goes up. And though brine shrimp can survive in extreme conditions, as Angelique pointed out in the video, these extreme imbalances greatly impact them. And then this has a major trickle effect in other areas. Next slide. So let's talk about the impact on brine shrimp in relationship to environment, economy, and ecosystem. So with environment, we're talking about the Great Salt Lake, and the brine shrimp eat the algae that grows in the Great Salt Lake, and it keeps it from overtaking the lake itself. And again, as Angelique pointed out, the brine shrimp also keeps the water fresh through their filtration system in their bodies. So if we don't have that balance of the water level and the salinity in that sweet spot, then our brine shrimp suffer. And if they suffer, then we can also see how that would impact the environment of the Great Salt Lake. Now, when we're talking about economy, we're talking about harvesting. Now, I know salt is collected from the Great Salt Lake, but I want to talk about the harvesting of the cysts that are those little hard eggs that Angelique also referred to. So when the temperatures drop in the winter, the adult brine shrimp release dormant eggs called cysts, which float to the surface of the lake. And then these cysts are harvested and exported all over the world to be used as fish food. And did you know that this industry brings up to $60 million to Utah every year? So again, if our brine shrimp are impacted by the imbalance, then that will also impact the economy of Utah. Now, ecosystem, our migratory birds. Around 10 million birds stop in and around the Great Salt Lake to fatten up on their journey before they take off. And they rely on brine shrimp as their main source of food. And birds such as the eared grebe can eat, this is incredible, between 20,000 and 30,000 brine shrimp per day. That's pretty incredible. And again, if there aren't 20,000 to 30,000 brine shrimp for one eared grebe, think about how many eared grebe probably are there trying to fatten up, then where would they go to eat and what would happen? As you can see, brine shrimp are so important. And I have a fun fact for you, and you may or may not know this. I didn't know this until I was doing my research, but on March 17th of last year, our Utah Governor, Spencer Cox, signed a bill making the brine shrimp Utah's official state crustacean. There you go on that. All right, tomorrow, let's go to the next slide. Okay, so the inspiration for our art activity that we will be doing is by this artist, Jill Pelto. She refers to herself as an artist and a science communicator. She has a master's of science, plus she also has a bachelor's of science degree in both studio art and earth science. And her work focuses on communicating human-environment connections. She incorporates scientific data directly into her paintings to engage a wide range of audiences to bring awareness to environmental issues using climate and conservation graphs. She also enjoys collaborating with adults and students. Next slide. In this particular watercolor of hers from 2015, which is actually the year that she started incorporating scientific data into her artwork, she created a series of painting about some of the major impacts of global warming that she had witnessed when she was in Washington State of the summer of 2015 conducting research. And she used scientific data that was gathered to show how the drought is devastating the state. If you can look at this image, you will notice at the top of where we can see the mountains, the glaciers right here, that there is a line graph happening. And so she took the data that she had collected, she plotted it, and then she translated it into an image to reflect the data. So in this particular painting, Jill used measurements from 1980 to 2014 on the average mass balance for a group of North Cascade, Washington glaciers. And just if you don't know this, mass balance, when we talk about that, is the health of a glacier, or the difference in snowfall gain versus melt each year. And so what Jill is showing with this particular piece of artwork and with her line graph of the data here is the mass balance is consistently negative as well as continually decreasing. Next slide, Tamara. So I'm not going to go into detail on the data for the next two slides, but I do want to show you some few more works of Jill's, which incorporate line graph data into the imagery. And it's also then translating that data into a picture so that we can see the relationship between the data and what it is talking about. So here is 40 years in the Northern Cascades. This is actually a recent work that she just did last year. And this one, if you can see on the top of that glacier in the middle, this one is actually an updated version of that last slide I just showed you. So this is her more current interpretation of the data that has been collected up till from the 1980s to actually 2022. Next. Here she is showing, you can see the line graph there to the side of the mountain Pica. So this is a piece talking about this particular animal that is found in Washington State. Next. We also have the seabirds of Seal Island. You can see the, sometimes her data points are really easy to see. Other times it's a little more integrated into the imagery, but where the little puffins are standing on top of those little rock peaks is where her data points are hitting. Next. Here's another one that is showing actually temperature variability with trout in the state of Maine. And so here you can see that she's actually used the data to kind of show like the water level itself and the animals that are impacted beneath, and also has brought into play here the presence of humans with that boat in the upper left-hand corner. Next. All right, so as an educator, no matter what grade you teach or what subject, if you have any lesson that has data that can be translated into a line graph, you can integrate that data into a work of art. And here you're seeing a couple samples from Jill working with some students. Here you can see the line graph in the upper left-hand corner, the student below who is taking that graph and then integrating it into their artwork to show the impact of ice melt with cities as climate change is happening. And you can see that line graph has been incorporated into this piece. Next. And here's another one. This one is showing how a student is translating that the scientific data they've collected on glaciers here and putting it and tracing it and then creating a watercolor and the impact on polar bears. And then our last slide here is just kind of a collage of 9 different art pieces that students have done on various scientific data that have been collected related to environmental issues. With some of them, you can obviously see the line graph, and others are a little more subtle, but each one is reflective of how that scientific data, what it is referring to, and the impact it is having on either the environment, on a particular species, or a combination of both. All right. Okay, so what we are going to do now is we are going to shift gears into working on our art activities. So make sure you have those two line graphs, plus a pencil eraser and some colored pencils. All right, sorry about that. I just had a little moment that I couldn't remember the next step to actually get my webcam going. All right, so what I want to show you here is actually my interpretation of the data that we are using tonight, where you can see with this dark line right here, that is our water level versus these two ones here, which are our salinity. And you can see that I've integrated elements here of about things that are impacted, especially our brine shrimp, that are impacted by when we do not have that sweet spot, that balance with our water salinity and our water levels, plus how it impacts. In this case, I'm showing the Great Salt Lake, plus I've also introduced an eared grebe as well. So this is kind of the final product, but what I want you guys to do, and for sake of time, I'm going to have you guys just follow along with me. So we're all going to do the same thing. Unless you just want to go off on your own and do your own thing, you're welcome to do that. But for tonight and for the sake of time, we're kind of just going to follow along and do a drawing similar to this. So I wanted to show this to you first. All righty, so the first thing that I would like you to do, here are our two line graphs that we provided you tonight with. What I would like you to do is to take the water level graph and lay it down first, and then place the water salinity one on top of it. Now you should be able to see through the paper, depending on the thick or thinness of your paper, you should be able to see the water level line behind it. If you can't, you can always just hop to a window, hold it up to the light, whatever works for you. But we're going to go ahead and with our pencil, we are going to trace that line onto our paper here. I want to point out right now that this paper right here, where I have the lines, is going to be considered our rough draft. And even though this is the one we're going to kind of work on and complete tonight, we will not get to this point tonight, which is considered the final draft. We will be doing a rough draft. I wanted to show you like where we're going to go with it so you can visually see that. All right, so once you trace your water level line onto this one, we can take the water level and we can move this out of the way. We won't need that any longer. So getting to this, even though we did not provide this for you for this evening, you will have access to this visual reference packet that I put together that you can use for yourself and for your students if you'd like to. But what I decided to do, thinking about the environment, the ecosystem, and the economy that are affected by brine shrimp, and making sure that our salinity and our water levels are in that sweet spot, I compiled visual references that are just pertain to those things that are impacted with my discussion with you guys tonight. So you guys can see that I have some brine shrimp images. A lot of times I personally like to throw in some clip art of things, because for students that they look at photos of realistic photos, it can be intimidating. Whereas clip art simplifies and keeps things easier for students, especially those that don't feel confident in their drawing skills, feel like they can draw these a lot easier. I have some eared grebes here. I have some algae, some under the microscope, a picture of like algae on the water at the Great Salt Lake. I have a couple pictures here of the Great Salt Lake, plus this map one. And then in this at the bottom, I have a ship with a net that is harvesting the cysts. I actually found a can of these, the brine shrimp that send out for fish food that I just thought was funny that maybe a student would want to incorporate. And here I just have a relationship, like a scale picture of a human hand with two little brine shrimp sitting there, so you can see how small those are in relationship to a human hand. So again, you don't have these tonight, but don't worry about it. I'll just walk you through the drawing just on our own, but that we will give this to you to have access to. All right, so getting back to our graph, what we're going to first start out with is our eared grebe. And so we're just going to come up here and draw a circle for a head. And we're going to draw a triangle for a beak. And we're going to divide that beak with a little horizontal line. And then we're going to come out and we're going to kind of create this like half circle shape. And then we're going to draw the eye. Eared grebes are so cool because they have this red, this intense red eye that is so beautiful. I'm going to put a little dot there. And then of course we got to do that fluffy, like feathers. Let me show this to you guys here. You guys can see the red eye, the beak, the little headpiece, and then they have these feathers, like eyelashes coming out from the eye. So we're going to draw those in. Then what we're going to do is we're going to treat our lines that we have here as if they're the top of this Great Salt Lake water. And so our ear grebe will be like floating in it. So what we're going to do is we're going to bring a neck down. And then we're going to create this body. And then we can kind of go lightly under because we, the body of this bird is under the water line because it's floating. And then we'll just come up here because on an eared grebe, they do have where their wings are folded back. So we'll create kind of another kind of half circle shape to be the wing part. So I'm going to bring this again to show you. So here we have the neck, we have this body here. Of course, we can't see underneath, so we lightly drew that. And then we have kind of those top feathers right there. All right. Now we got to put Antelope Island in the background. We have to create something that's in the back. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to come across here and draw this line indicating kind of the shoreline. It's going to come behind our eared grebe, come here. And then I'm just going to draw what is going to be our Antelope Island right here as well. Okay. All right. So we have our eared grebe. We know that it is impacted if brine shrimp disappear because it's their main food source. We have Antelope Island. And if we lose the Great Salt Lake, that will impact, both floral and fauna and other animals on the island. And of course, we can't forget our cute little brine shrimp. So we have to actually have these floating around underneath the water. And really simple using the clip art, because it's just a simple way to draw them. And they're kind of really cute too. What we're going to do is we're going to draw two little eyes. So we're going to do two little circles. So two little circles like that. And then we're going to connect those. It kind of looks like those googly eye rings that Tamara used with her brine puppet. We're going to come up over here to connect the head. Put two little dots for the eyes. And then two little antennae right there. Now, you will notice, let me bring this back. And I thought this was funny. I did this with my junior high students today. I went through this activity with them. And as I was drawing my brine shrimp, I put smiley faces on the ones I started. And I had a student come over and say, Miss Roundy, don't you think your brine shrimp would be frowning? And I was like, well, what do you mean? And they're like, well, when things are not in balance, they're not happy. And so I thought that was a really great observation. So this little guy, because I'd already drawn their faces, their smiley faces with pen, I put a frowny face here and a frowny face here because yeah, they would be sad because they're not living their best life when the salinity and the levels are messed up. So we're going to do a frowny face because our brine shrimp are not happy right now. And then we're going to take their bodies, which is kind of like this little moon shape. And we're going to draw those fun little arms, those appendages like this. And then on their tail, let's do two little kind of triangles. See how simple that was to draw a brine shrimp? It was pretty easy to do. Let's go ahead and just do a couple more brine shrimp. Let's just keep it to 3. And let's just move them around, thinking about the composition of our piece. 2 little eyes, little black dots. We're going to make that little googly eye ring connect to be the head. We have our little antennae. And then we are going to take this little moon-shaped body, little triangles on the end, and don't forget, oh, we got to do the frowny face, and we're going to do the appendages. And then I'm going to do one more, remembering my water line here that we're using for our water line. I'm going to do one more. I'm going to do this one upside down. So I'm going to put my eyes down low. I'm going to do connect. Put my little antennae frowny face. I'm going to do my little crescent moon and my appendages. Okay. So after, oh, you know what? One thing I need to do is kind of come back to this and make it look a little bit better than what I did. Okay. So after you've penciled all this in, because remember, this is our rough draft. So if we need to erase and move things and tighten things up, we can do that. What I would instruct your students to do at this point is to take a fresh sheet of copy paper and place it on top of this. And then go to a window, or if you have a light box, or if your students are able to see through, they would trace it. So let me show you this really quickly. So this is what I did earlier today. This was my rough draft. As you guys can see, I put Antelope Island and eared grebe. I put my little brine shrimp. I have all of that. Then I took a clean piece of copy paper, placed it, went to a window, and then I used a Sharpie to trace, because what I wanted is I wanted the line graph to stand out more than my lines for the brine shrimp and for the eared grebe. So I wanted a visual contrast because I wanted my line graph data to pop out a little bit more. So I went ahead, once I traced it with black Sharpie, I went and I colored it with colored pencil. And when I finished it, I signed it. So I just wanted to show you that that would be the next step in this case. So since we're only getting to the rough draft part, what I'd like you guys to do, once you've drawn in everything, you can go ahead, take your colored pencils and just start coloring in and start adding color. While you're doing this, I'm going to actually bring it back to this for right now so you can get some coloring. You know, an eared grebe has the oranges and yellows of the feathers there. Definitely that red eye. They have a black beak. This is kind of a darker brown black, as their body is also brown, a rust color, and reds in it. But while you guys are coloring, I'm just going to show a few examples from my junior high students. I do want to point out that my junior high students roughly had the same amount of time you guys, maybe 10 minutes extra in creating. So please don't judge in the sense of, whoa, is that what you got? Well, yeah, it's what I got today, because I was trying to see how far they could get in the time allotted, similar to you guys. So here I have one of my students who was starting to add in details using the visual references that I provided for them. I let them interpret however they wanted. So it started like this and then got to this. So they were just kind of in the middle, starting to build up and draw in that information. I have this one right here, starting to add in the details. And then I really like this one because they added the money with a big X, because of course we lose all that $60 million a year from the industry of harvesting, a brine shrimp cyst. Then I have this rough draft right here. And then they were bringing it into this as well. I think this is supposed to be algae down here, not dollar bills that are floating at the bottom of the Great Salt Lake. Not quite sure what that is, but anyways. And then the last one I want to show you, one thing I really loved is my students' interpretation of the brine shrimp. They were all very different. But here again, we have this happening, and then we ended up on this one. So we have a few more minutes for you guys to work on this project. So while you're doing that, what I'm going to do is just share a few more fun facts just to kind of tell you. Let me find my paper. About the Great Salt Lake and the impact that it has. Okay, let me go here. I thought it was interesting to find out with the economy that it supports, our Great Salt Lake supports our ski industry, which is worth 20,000 jobs and another $1.2 billion. So that's another economical fact about our Great Salt Lake just in general. When it comes to environment, it is responsible for 5 to 10% of the snow that falls south and east of the lake. And the lake effect snow extends our ski season by up to 5 to 7 weeks. That's why Utah has the greatest snow on earth, because we usually have it for a longer period in the season. Another thing is that with the ecology, the Great Salt Lake supports 80% of Utah's valuable wetlands. We need to make sure that we support the Great Salt Lake and bring awareness to it. And you as educators, which is so great, is you have access to students to bring this information to them and to share it with them and see how our students, your students, can interpret scientific data that they can find online or collect themselves, and then put together to create works of art similar to this that can bring awareness, not only to the classroom setting itself and to your school, but also to those in Utah and across the United States. So I just want to say thank you for doing this activity with me, and I appreciate you being here tonight. So I will turn it over to Tamara now.
Erin, thanks so much. All right. Now Alisa is back with us, and she's going to revisit the thinking routine and do a salt painting activity.
Thank you so much. I just have to say, I wish I could be Erin's student. I just really enjoyed learning from her for the past half an hour. Okay, Tamara, will you take us to the next slide? So we're going to do a few things, but I wanted you to have your hot water, Epsom salt, white or black paper, and a paintbrush. And you can do this project with cool temperature water as well. It will just work a little better with hot, but use what you have. So if we go to the next slide, while I'm talking, I want you to kind of prepare your salt and water. We're going to mix a 1-to-1 ratio. So we gave you a 1/4 cup of salt. This is Epsom salt. And so mix that 1-to-1, so with a 1/4 cup of hot water. Or you don't have to mix it all up. You can just do a tablespoon of salt and a tablespoon of water. We won't use very much. So even if you use that much, that'll be plenty for tonight. And just start stirring that together. It'll take a little bit for the salt to dissolve into your water. So work on that for a minute, and let's go on to the next slide. I wanted to show you now where these images came from. And I actually wanted to find some works of art that would make me think of the Great Salt Lake. And I found this amazing exhibit that was on display in Salt Lake from July to October of 2022. I'm wondering if any of you in the Salt Lake area saw these on display. These were vinyl banners that were, as you can see in this image, hung in these frames on the streets of Salt Lake. And these were commissioned by Craft Lake City Celebration of the Hand series. And they do this every summer. And this year, or that year in 2022, their theme was Save Our Great Salt Lake. So let's go to the next slide. We didn't use all of the images from this collection, but I picked a few that I felt really could connect with the Utah standards. But this is an article from KSL.com, and I absolutely love this headline, Art is a Good Teacher. And then they talked about this exhibit drawing attention to the drying Great Salt Lake. And I think that that is a good conversation to have with students. Can their art teach something to someone? And so as we've been learning about the Salt Lake, the Great Salt Lake, if there's anything that you think your students might want to share with other people, they can create artwork to communicate the ideas that they have, to motivate change, or even just to teach people. I love that Angelique said that when we educate people about the importance of the Great Salt Lake and asking them to come visit and learn about it can help them want to protect it as well. So if we go to the next slide, here's one more picture. And this is a quote from Angela Brown, the director, executive director of Craft Lake City. When this article was written, she said, "I think we forget all of the good the lake provides. This collection of art provides a chance to reflect on our own relationship with the lake and appreciate the lake for what it gives us and the ecosystem it provides so we can live here." I love that Angelique talked about how sometimes the lake can get a bad rap because people think it's dirty or it smells bad. But when we recognize all of the good that it does for our environment, for birds and other animals, and then also for our economy, I think it's a real treasure. So I'm excited to make some art about the lake. So let's go to the next slide. Before we start our art, we're going to revisit the 3-2-1 bridge thinking routine that we started. So if you pull that worksheet back out again. By the way, this is a routine from the Project Zero collection of thinking routines, which you can find online, and there's a link at the bottom of the worksheet. They have lots and lots of little activities you can do with students to help them think or get thinking. And I love this one because you capture an initial response to something that you don't know a lot about. And then later, once you've learned about it, you capture a new response. So we're going to put new ideas down on that page. So if we go to the next slide, we'll see that I originally said bird, flower, sad. What kind of flower is that? Is the bird crying? And I feel the bird looks like a state or national symbol. So if you start thinking about your work of art, what are your new ideas? For me, after learning all of these things, new words that came to my mind were habitat and lake and salinity. Those are things that are on my mind now. And does the bird eat the brine flies? I'm thinking about how seagulls often run along with their mouths open, so it makes me think of that. And is pollution causing problems for this bird? And my metaphor or simile, I feel like the tear is maybe a cry for help. I love how Angelique invited us to go pick up trash at the lake. And I think that maybe this artist is asking us what we can do to help the birds that come to the Great Salt Lake. So think about what you might add onto your paper, but then the real, I think, effective use of this this thinking routine is what happens next. So if we go to the next slide, we are going to create a bridge. And this is where you look at what you used to think and compare it to what you know now. And you can do this in writing and have students do writing, or you can even have them just talk with a small group or talk as a whole class, comparing what did we think before, how did that change, and thinking about the change that happened. That's the bridge. So I wrote, I didn't know very much about Great Salt Lake before, so I wondered why the bird would be sad. Now I know that lots of birds eat brine shrimp and brine flies at the lake, and I'm wondering if the bird has less food than normal because the salinity of the water's too high, or if the bird is sad about trash and pollution at the lake. What I really like about this, because we don't necessarily answer all of our questions, but as we learn more, we always have new questions, and this can show students, the more I know, the more I want to know, and I have things I could go do research about. So since we saw from this article, art can be a great teacher. We're going to make a little work of art that lets you teach somebody something that you learned about the lake. And so you can pull your ideas from the bridge or any idea that you had tonight, and we're going to use that to make a work of art. Let's go to the next slide. I think it's going to tell me. Oh yeah. So start thinking about what you might want to share that you learned about the lake. Are there any words that you used on that worksheet? Or any words that are coming to mind? Can you think of lines or patterns that you might use to teach people about the lake? You can think of shapes and pictures and colors. What might you use if you were asked to create a work of art to teach somebody what you know about the lake? Okay, let's go to the next slide. I think, yep, it's asking me to share my screen. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. Okay, so now we're here with my document camera. I just have a piece of black cardstock here, and I'm going to show you, I'm hoping that that's focusing a little bit. This is my cup that I put together water and salt. I just have a small amount here. And because we have so much water, salt in this water, it almost feels a little bit like gel when you paint with it. So I'm just going to paint a little bit on this paper. It sits a little bit on the surface. It might look a little bit glossy. And you can see when I paint with it, originally, it'll just look like water, really. But what's cool, and you may have done this before, maybe you've seen it, is that this water has a really high salinity, right? There's a lot of salt in the water. And when you spread it out really thin, and that allows the water to evaporate out. And so fairly quickly, as the water dries, it's going to leave that salt behind. And so I really love that this activity is so similar to what happens in Great Salt Lake when the water does evaporate out of the lake. In fact, when companies mine the salt, they spread the water out really thin and let the water evaporate, and then they can collect all the salt that was left behind. So that's exactly what's happening here. I painted this about maybe about 4 hours ago, and you can see that there are salt crystals that are forming here on my words. But what's really neat about this is that if you let this sit longer, those crystals continue to form, and this, it may look about like this in about a day or two. It gets really quite white, which is super cool. So it'll start forming crystals right away. And what's cool is you can kind of look closely and see the crystal patterns right on the surface of the paper, which is pretty awesome. I want to invite you to just start experimenting now. You can think about a phrase or a statement that you'd like to make in words or in picture on the papers that you have, and just experiment with your materials. And I'm going to show you a few other things. So this is an example. In this, I drew on black paper using construction paper crayons, or you can use a white crayon or a white marker, something light, to draw, and then I painted over it with the salt. And so this is the brine shrimp life cycle. This is another example where I drew first, and I did this with construction paper crayons. You could also use oil pastels, clean up the Great Salt Lake. And then so I colored these in with a construction paper crayons and painted the water with the salt mixture. And you can see that it's starting to really crystallize. I did want to show you, we're using heavy drawing paper and heavy cardstock. And as always, when you use water on it, it will curl up a little bit. And usually that's not a problem. You can just straighten it back out. But with this, if I straighten it out, the salt will start breaking off the paper. Oh, and I want to show you, this is what, sorry, I did a while ago, and you can see it's already drying and forming crystals along the way, which is pretty great. But if you don't want to have this breaking off, you can use a heavy surface. So I have the example that I showed a minute ago of using foam board, or you can just glue your paper onto a piece of cardboard. And if that's really rigid and flat, then it's going to really keep it from buckling and sending those salt crystals flying. If you wanted to display these, I would recommend putting them into a, what's the word? a sheet protector, perhaps, to keep students from touching it. It would feel kind of magical, or I know my own children will be drawn to touching them. So that's something you can do. But I wanted to show you, oh, and here's another example. This one is just some brine shrimp and some patterns. I think that this works better. So you can see in this example, when I covered a large area with salt, it's interesting, but I think it's more interesting when you use pattern or texture or lines. And so I've got a lot of salt crystals that are going to form around the brine shrimp. To me, it almost feels like the algae that's growing there in the lake that the brine shrimp eat. So I took some of my salt water and I added a few drops of liquid watercolor paint. There are several brands that you can purchase. This works really well, but I also have found that just using food coloring works really well as well. And so I made small amounts of colored saltwater solution. And what I found is that on the black, the color doesn't show up very well. But if you use it on white paper, it shows up great. So I have these beautiful crystals that are forming along with color. And you can see, you can also start with the drawing. In this case, I just use a Sharpie marker and drew my picture first and then quickly filled in with the salt solution with color. I do want to say also, one thing that works great is if you lay down a thicker amount of water, so lots more water than you might normally use when you're painting, and let it kind of sit on the surface, you're going to get better crystals. And if you paint over back and forth over the same area, the crystals won't be as great. And so this is kind of a really quick project where you're laying down your paint in broad strokes rather than really fussing over each area for a long time. Let's see. This is just another example of using lots of texture and color and quickly doing a pattern. And I did want to show you, this is an example of one that I created a while ago and it wasn't not protected, and you can see it will break off. So that's why adding a little bit of a harder surface is a great idea. And here's one where I just like to experiment and do a lot of things. I colored on a paper, the whole paper with crayons, and then I just coated the whole paper with salt to see what would happen. And you can see it kind of sticks a little bit, which is interesting, but not a lot. And in this case, it's stuck in between my strokes of the crayon. So I'm hoping while I'm showing you these ideas that you are working on your own ideas and just experimenting with your materials there at home. Here's one more. This one's kind of fun where I just filled in around as much as I could. And I believe in these cases, I drew with a crayon that was quite similar to the paper color. So when I painted over it, it resisted the salt, which is kind of cool. So I personally love using just the clear salt water on a darker paper like this, or using colors on the on white paper. But I love the conversations that you could have with students as you do this kind of project, where you can talk about how or what the water is like in Great Salt Lake, and how the water does have salt in it, and how that's quite different than a freshwater lake or river that they might encounter everywhere else. And I love that even if you do have kind of a disaster where the salt starts breaking off a student's paper, I think it offers an opportunity for an interesting conversation about how the salt is left behind when the lake is drying. And as the lake level goes down, the lake shrinks. And there are really interesting maps that you can find online where you can see the level of the lake at different times of year. So the lake can rise when there's a lot of snow melt in the spring and summer, and it can go down in the summer as it gets hotter. And so you can talk about how all of the area where the water is drying has been left with the minerals behind. Salt, yes, but then also the other minerals that Angelique told us about. So I'm hoping that you're just experimenting and trying a few different things, but I wanted to tell you that in your packet of materials that you'll receive once once you complete the survey at the end of this webinar, I have collected, tons and tons of really amazing resources where you can find lesson plans and interactive websites about the environment and the ecosystem at Great Salt Lake that really apply quite well to elementary grades, where you can see, like I said before, what happens with the lake at different times, how different weather or different seasons impact it. And you can see the life cycle of a brine shrimp, or how the migratory birds come and eat them on their way to other places. So I think that I just have a few more minutes left, but I would recommend that you continue to experiment, and I hope you try a few different things. And if you do have color where you are, add a little bit. Oh, I did want to say, it's so fun, I think, to experiment with materials. So I've tried using the salt and water with every art supply I have. And what's really interesting is that I thought, oh, what if I color with watercolor pencils and then paint with the salt water on top of it? It won't budge. If you know watercolor pencils, you can draw with them, and then when you brush water over them, they kind of dissolve and spread out like beautiful watercolor. But that won't happen with watercolor pencils. The salt in the water doesn't allow that pencil to dissolve at all, which is, I think, super interesting. Well, I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen, or ask Tamara, go ahead and take it back, and we'll see. I think we're going to hear about some dance next. Thank you.
Alisa, before you leave,
Yes.
before we learn about dance with Kelly,
Mhm.
if you could tell us a little bit about the art sharing that we have coming up.
Yes, absolutely. So we've done this. If you've joined us for webinars in the past, we love to see what you're working on in your own homes and in your places of work. So we have created a Padlet. The QR code on the screen right now, you can scan that with your phone or with a tablet, and it will bring you to our Padlet website. And we're just asking you to share pictures of anything that you've created today. So your puppet, your graph, work of art, anything that you created with the salt painting. There's also a link to this in the chat. I will say that it's a little bit easier to do this on a separate device than try to navigate it on the same device that you're watching the webinar on, but it is possible. So if we go to the next slide, if you haven't used Padlet before, it's super easy. When you go to the website, you can find a plus icon somewhere on the screen. And if you hit that, then it will ask you to type in a title. You can put your name or anything you want as a title, and then a description or comment. And then you can see these icons on the page. You can click on your camera, or you can click to upload an image and share with us something that you're taking on your phone or your other device, so that we can see pictures. And if you hit share, then that'll go onto this website and everyone can see it. And you can post as many pictures as you want. We really, really love seeing what you're creating. And I made the puppet, so I'll be sharing a picture of that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alisa. All right. As you guys are continuing to create art, we're going to have a brief video here from Kelly Bruce Glenn, where she's going to talk about movement and dance connected to the Great Salt Lake.
Hello, I'm super excited today to share some opportunities for you to use movement in your science lessons. We're going to be using something called improvisation. That means your students will be coming up with the movements and you will serve as the facilitator. So let's get started. We're going to be using two elements of dance, body and space. Body talks about all the different creative shapes that your body can make. It can be rounded, it can be twisted. Let's try some together. On the count of 3, I'd like you to make a shape that I have never seen before. 1, 2, 3, shape. Excellent. Let's try another one. 1, 2, 3, shape. Another one. 1, 2, 3, shape. Excellent. Now we're going to explore the element of space. Space talks about where we're at in the space. It talks about high, medium, and low levels. Let's blend our creative shapes with the element of space. Can you make a high shape that's on one leg? 1, 2, 3. How about a low shape that's twisted? 1, 2, 3. How about a medium shape that's upside down? Excellent. Now we're going to go ahead and blend our dance content with our science content. When we're looking at science, we're looking at phenomena. Specifically, we'll be looking at patterns and how patterns change over time. For example, when we're learning about the Great Salt Lake, we might look at the patterns that happen with the water levels. You are going to group students in small groups to create a tableau. Tableau is a frozen image that you're going to create with all of those creative shapes and levels. Perhaps the first bit of data you look at is from a point where the water level was really high and wide and dense, and your first student can make a wide, open, high shape. Perhaps the next data that you analyze was a time when the water was very low, and a student can make a low shape. You'll be able to blend these all together with groups of 3 to 5 in order to see data visually. This gives students an opportunity to not only develop some creative movement vocabulary, but also think about how data is represented visually. I have some teacher tips for you. So teacher tip number 1, when you're integrating dance into the lessons, go ahead and try out practicing before you get to the project. Do some warm-up activities where students are just exploring creative shapes and levels before they start their movement vocabulary development. The second thing is do it with students. I know students are creating the movement, but you as teachers are serving as the models. When you model ways that you can try out new creative things, your students will follow suit. I hope you enjoyed this lesson and happy dancing.
Thanks, Kelly.
Hello.
All right. We're going to show the QR code for the Padlet one more time because we do really love to see whatever you might be working on at home. And now I'm going to invite Amy Miner to come back and join us. Go to the next slide. She's going to bring everything together for us.
All right. Wow, so many great ideas in this webinar tonight. I have loved learning from each of the different presenters. So as we think about integration, remember where we left off. So from all the ideas you've seen, what would work in your school? What would work in your classroom? And what would work with your students? And we hope that you'll find different ideas from each of the presentations tonight to integrate into your classroom. Let's go ahead and look at that next slide. So in summary with the science, I hope you were able to see some of these cross-cutting standards around patterns, cause and effect, systems, energy, instability, and change. I think the Great Salt Lake is the perfect metaphor and model to learn about some of these ideas. Also notice how we were looking at the specific skills of asking questions, interpreting data, mathematical thinking, and again, communicating our findings in text, graphs, diagrams, salt paintings, lots of different kinds of things in tables and verbally. On the next slide, I've given you just a quick high-level summary of the different standards that I introduced at the beginning. But when you look at those key words around living things, environments, ecosystem, how we interact with our ecosystem, you can see how the Great Salt Lake is a perfect integration opportunity for science, math, language arts, and the fine arts. The next slide describes again those mathematical practices. Look at the different relationships, the symbols, the representations of data. The next one is a summary of our English language arts, the speaking and listening, as well as referring back to the character, which, by the way, Tamara, I don't know how you say that title over and over again without like slipping in some other words or fumbling, because that is quite an alliteration mouthful. So again, you could even bring in alliteration with the title of that great book. All right, as we round out, we're looking at drama and dance, and I really love the idea of bringing all of this together. Imagine creating the puppet and inviting students to use vocabulary words to tell a story with the beginning, middle, and end, but then having your students not only use the puppet to create that movement and gesture and sound, but also to use their bodies. Just like we learned, moving bodies in lots of combinations, high, medium, and low, and lots of contrast. We move on to the next one when we talk about visual arts, thinking about investigating personal ideas through art making, lots of different materials, including salt. And as we think about it, using our surroundings and the observations of our surroundings as we bring in the art. With the observations of our surroundings, we round out with our music soundscape that Samantha taught us about. And I really love the idea of bringing in found objects to create that soundscape, to create and generate music ideas for a specific purpose, and thinking about the way we can create those sounds, imagine being in that space, and bring in musical elements like dynamics, tempo, timbre, voice, and movement. So as we round out, go ahead and forward a couple of slides there, Tamara. Keep going. In addition to the academic standards that we've talked about, and in addition to all of the wonderful ideas and activities that have been shared, I also want you to step back and think about how you can educate the whole child. In these integrated activities, students have had opportunities to communicate, to collaborate, to innovate, and apply and transfer their learning in a way that we can only do through integrated instruction. With this, I love looking again at the whole child and asking, what do we want them to know, do, and become as a result of our instruction? And in this case, applied to the Great Salt Lake, one of the things we hope they'll become is responsible citizens that make really informed decisions based on the experiences they've had, the knowledge they've gained, and those skills that they've acquired. So with that, I hope that you'll think about all of the different potential opportunities. Whenever we integrate, we always start with the basis standards and then think beyond and think imaginatively about that. In your folder and your packet, there's a summary of those standard slides and the integrated opportunities for you. Thanks, everyone. Back to you, Tamara.
Thank you, Amy. All right. In a few minutes, we're going to have a Q&A, a brief Q&A for our webinar. I know we've had a few questions that have already come up in the chat. We'll make sure we get those answered. In addition, we want you to feel free to start entering any questions that you have for anyone that's presented today. You can use the Q&A feature on this webinar. If you want to ask a specific person a question, you can do that through the Q&A. Just let us know who you would like to ask, and we will get to that. But before we get to that, we're going to go back to the art sharing, and I'm going to invite Alisa back.
Yes, I have loved watching as your images are coming in. And so we're going to look at what we have, and you're still welcome to add more, but I'm going to share the screen now so we can look together at what's showing up on the Padlet, which I'm really excited about. So here we go. Okay. So I'm looking at the Padlet in a slideshow format. So these are two pictures I threw up earlier, but look at this. We have Brine Trip, Brine Our Money, and Save the Shrimp. Oh, I love that we can see all three hands-on projects there. Save Me. Brine Shrimp with salt water. I love that. That looks like an oil pastel with the salt water on top. Too much water with the salt. You know what? It might show up. Sometimes it takes a little while. That's an awesome puppet. One thing I remember that we had a question about the paper. I think that we will include in the packet where we got the materials, especially the fringe for these puppets, because isn't it amazing? Very cool. Tiny brine have a huge impact. Absolutely. I love the big, big letters. Cool. Shrimp swimming. I like that this person added color to the salt water. Brinkley, the brine shrimp. Oh, I love that this is Erin's brine shrimp that she taught us how to draw made with salt. Very cool. And look at this graph art with water levels. And I believe that's the salt air area that used to be a tourist attraction there at Salt Lake. I just started learning about that. It's very interesting history. These puppets are great. Very good. I love how the water level above is colored and down below it's not. Beautiful. Oh, I just so thankful to see that you're working alongside of us. Conserve. I love having students just think of a word that they can share in their artwork or a statement, save our Great Salt Lake. I love this idea of coming to see the lake. That's something I've never done. I've never driven up to it, so I need to go visit those two parks. So many people have shared. I love this. Excellent. What's cool, those salty paintings are going to continue to crystallize. Excellent. Very cool. Oh, I love it with the color. I feel like that spiral jetty in the lake. Very cool. Okay, that's our last picture. You are welcome to continue adding. I'm going to stop my share. You can continue adding to, actually tomorrow I'll let you take the share back, but add to the Padlet and you'll be able to see and visit each other's pictures there for the next little while.
Alisa,
Thanks.
thank you so much.
Yes.
That's amazing. Just a few quick items as we finish up this webinar. We are revisiting our learning intentions and success criteria that we set at the beginning of the webinar. Take part in an arts integrated activity connected to science and the arts. Explore the Utah standards and how they are aligned. Hopefully, we've had success and you have at least one idea of how to integrate science and art in your classroom. And you can see some of the intersections and overlaps that are happening in the Utah standards with this material. We also want to let you know, and you guys have already started this, that we love to see you implement these ideas with your students and how you make them work in your classroom with your students. And if you show us your work, we will put you into a drawing for a $50 Amazon gift card. Samantha will send you reminders about this right around June 7th when we would love to have them back. So please do that. We love to see that. And now we want to make sure we answer any questions that you have. So I'm going to invite everybody, all of our presenters, to turn on their cameras and join me here. We're all here. All right. Let's answer the questions that, if we haven't already, that came in through the chat. Sam, did you see any questions?
Yeah, one that we have not answered yet is someone asked if you can put a fixative on the salt painting. I think maybe to help the salt from falling off and cracking.
You know, that's a great question. And I did try that a few months ago, and I found that my painting from that I didn't put a fixative on, that was moved around in and out of my car and my bag. The one with no fixative, all the salt was off of the paper. And the one with fixative, the salt is still on the paper, but it is starting to come off. So I think it will prolong the life a little bit, but definitely not forever. And I used not hairspray, but an actual like art fixative, and it smelled terrible, but it did save it for a little bit, but not forever.
I have a question. Angelique, when you were interviewed, you talked about how part of the Great Salt Lake turns pink. Why does it turn pink?
Yeah, so Great Salt Lake, the north arm is actually pink year round, and it kind of changes in shades depending on water. But a majority of that is because the high salinity up there. The north arm of the lake is about 28% salinity, which, to give some comparison, the ocean is about 3 to 5% salinity. So a certain type of haliophile reacts with the algae and the salinity up there and creates that pink color. And of course, in those drier months is when you see that really vivid, like almost magenta shade of pink. And as we get more water in is when it starts to turn like a lighter shade of pink.
Oh, thanks. I didn't know that. We have a few more questions. Okay. Have you painted with water from the Great Salt Lake? Has anyone, any of our presenters, has anyone tried that?
No, I haven't. And I feel like the salt water we're using is a higher salinity, but it doesn't mean it wouldn't work with water from Salt Lake. Angelique, do you know anything about that? Would that work if we put it out on water and let it evaporate?
So I'm sure it would work. I've never tried it myself. In fact, I was going to grab a little sample before I left work and then I forgot. So I was upset at myself for that. It's like, but we do actually have these little jars at the park that show, it shows like the Bear River area, which is it's a lower percentage of salinity because that's a majority of the fresh water we get from rivers is from that Bear River area. So we have a jar from that area. We have a jar from the park where it's about 16% salinity. And then we also have a jar from the north arm of the lake. And you can actually like see the different levels of salt where all the water is evaporated by now. These were actually collected several years ago. So I would assume it would work as well, especially that north arm of the lake. You'd probably get some pretty good crystals out of there.
Excellent. Jen Purdy has a question that I also have. Jen is wondering, you invited people to try swimming in the lake. Where is the best place to do that?
Yeah, so I would recommend probably the two state parks, if I'm being honest. Great Salt Lake, we're a relatively short walk to the water. Antelope Island has some wonderful beaches as well. Can be, depending on lake levels, a bit of a longer walk to the water. However, those are the only two locations I know that have rinse-off stations. So when you come out of that water, you're going to want to rinse off. I've seen people, bring their own water to rinse off up at like the spiral jetty area, but you will watch that salt dry on your skin. You will be the paper in this art example.
Can't wait to do it. We have another question, and this one's going back a ways, so we'll see if anybody knows the answer to this one. Does anyone know what the salinity of the lake was when Floyd was visiting? So the late 80s. I guess, is that on our data? No, we didn't come. I imagine there were a lot of brine shrimp for him to have stayed there.
So the 80s is actually like a flooding time frame for a lot of it. That's when like State Street was flooded, Saltaire was flooded. So I don't have that top like the salinity percentage off the top of my head. However, we would assume the southern like arm of the lake where Great Salt Lake State Park and Antelope Island State Park are, the salinity would be it'd probably be about 11%, and that's off the top of my head. There is some historical data if you go to the website they created for Great Salt Lake about 2-3 years ago. I think it's like something like greatsaltlake.utah.gov. That might not be exactly, but it is something very similar to.
Thank you so much. All right, this is a great question. How can we schedule a field trip to the Great Salt Lake?
Yes. So a lot of the field trips, scheduling field trips, I would recommend going to the Great Salt Lake State Park website or Antelope Island State Park website. They both are fantastic places for field trips, and we have different setups. So on our website for field trips, I believe it's on our event page. It has basically emailing me to make sure there's no scheduling conflicts. Antelope Island State Park website has their own like little tab specifically for field trips, and they've got a Google form to fill out in order to request a date for a field trip.
Thank you so much. Here's another great question. All right, let's see. They're coming in now. Did Pink Floyd, the Chilean flamingo, did Floyd die of natural causes? Anyone want to take a stab at that one?
I can jump in on that one. And I typed this in the chat, but it is believed that Floyd died of natural causes. He came back and forth for a few decades, and then one winter just didn't come back. He was migrating and spending his winters at the Great Salt Lake. And so it was about the typical life expectancy of a Chilean flamingo. So that's what it's what they suspect.
Oh, really great question. Thanks you, Sam. So Angelique, there's a question. Do you or your fellow are naturalists there at the Great Salt Lake Park, do you guys go to schools to do presentations?
We can. A lot of the times they're scheduled through either our like region manager or our like public information officer. A lot of the times what we go out and do is especially like the career days at schools where a big group of us from DNR usually go out, one of us from like every division. But that's something either you can reach out through my email, which I can put in the chat actually. To inquire about, or if you wanted to reach out to, I believe it'd be Devin Chavez, would be a good, like, that's our public information officer. And even if I'm not available, he can also try and figure out someone else who would be.
So it sounds like we should include some of this contact information for the Great Salt Lake State Park and Antelope State Park in our resource information. So anyone who's interested can follow up. And of course, you're going to have access to this great webinar with all of these ideas that you can share with your students. Great. I think we have answered all of the questions. All right. So we've come to the end of our webinar. So we are going to give you a link for the survey. We're going to throw that into the chat. Please complete this survey. After you complete your survey, we're going to be able to give you your relicensure hours in Midas. And we'll also email you a link to the Google folder with all the information and the recording from today's webinar. We anticipate that you'll have all this information by April 26th. So we want to thank you to all of our great presenters today. It was a pleasure to have you, and I learned a lot about the Great Salt Lake. I'm sure you guys did too. And we're going to hang out a little bit. We're going to turn off our cameras, but we're going to hang out here a little bit and allow everybody to complete the survey. So thank you all for joining us today. Take care.